right, good afternoon, everyone. It's Cynthia Motters from ArmyPink. Today we have a very special guest, Melody Godfred. Say hello, Melody.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, and we're going to go through her background, but I just want to give a little brief intro on ArmyPink. ArmyPink is a brand that is all about shining a light on abuse. And if you've tuned into some of our broadcasts, you notice that we've talked to a lot of people that have experienced abuse and have went through trauma, and from narcissistic behavior to physical abuse to mental abuse. And I'm really excited about Melody because she talks about self-love. And you've published two books, right? The self-love book and the shift. Is that correct?
I actually have a third book as well called The ABCs of Self-Love, which is a guided self-love journal.
Oh, that's awesome. And so I think, like, sometimes we wonder how we get in these situations or how we get taken advantage of. And I think a lot of it has to do with not really taking an internal, checklist of ourselves and what's important to us, and being a pleaser and not giving ourselves that self-love. So I think this topic is so important for those that are having a challenging time. And also, I don't know what it is, but like, you feel guilty for like loving on yourself, or complimenting yourself or giving yourself accolades. But I think it's so important, don't you?
Absolutely. I think we've kind of been cultured to associate femininity with sacrifice, whether that's sacrificing our time or sacrificing our identities. And I'm someone who loves to be of service. I think that is one of my callings in life, is to serve others. And that's why I share this message of self-love. But I can't be of service if I'm disconnected from my authentic self. I can't be of service if I break myself in the process, because then I lose sight of what I was put on this planet to offer, which is me.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's why we are all here, is to
Yes.
offer our truest self and our gifts to the world.
Yeah. For those of us who haven't read your books, can you tell us a little bit about like the first book and what it's about, in case this is something, someone wants to pick up?
Absolutely. So my poetry book is called Self-Love Poetry for Thinkers and Feelers. It is 100 pairs of poems about living a life of self-love. And on the left side of every page, there's a poem that speaks to the analytical left brain thinker. And on the right side is a poem that speaks to the more emotional, intuitive feeler. And the hope is that as people read these poems, it helps them discover the path home to themselves by addressing how to deal with feelings like shame or guilt or fear or resentment, all the things that kind of get layered on top of our essence and stand in the way of us not only loving ourselves, but claiming ourselves. And so my poetry is designed to really unlock that road home.
Uh-huh.
And then I have another poetry book called The Shift, Poetry for New Perspective. I actually wrote these poems during the pandemic, and
Hmm.
it was about really discovering what happens when you commit to self-love and you're put in a very difficult position, like we all were during the pandemic. How can we all collectively shift from the old way of isolation and fear and doubt and shift towards the new way of trust and love and hope? And that's what those poems really embody, is that shift that we've all made. Because
Right.
as hard as this time has been, there's been a lot of learning as well. And I know I absolutely grew so much during the past few years.
Well, it was so challenging, right? And we didn't know what to do, and if we could connect with people, and I think more importantly, how are we going to connect with people?
Yes.
Yeah.
The beauty though for me is that once I got over that initial shock of everything being stripped away, I actually realized how much I needed that stillness to be able to understand what my priorities are, to be able to hear my inner voice and my intuition, and how to be a little bit more deliberate and intentional about how I defined not only my own identity, but my relationships and my priorities moving forward.
Yeah.
And, speaking of abuse, I think it's what you said at the beginning. When we lose ourselves, it's easy to fall victim to these patterns. And having read up on trauma, one of the things that I find most interesting is that trauma can become really comfortable, even though it's bad for us. And breaking that cycle requires a commitment to doing the work. And for me, writing poetry and sharing it and exploring these topics like self-love and self-care and self-worth, that's how I commit to doing the work and making sure that how I show up in the world is how I want to show up in the world.
Yeah, we had a guest on here, and one of the things she said that really helped her was journaling.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like that helped you kind of write out some of your things in the poetry and
Yeah, that's
book.
actually why I wrote the book, The ABCs of Self-Love,
Mhm.
because I personally needed a more structured way to get in touch with myself. I think a lot of people say journal, but that blank page can be so intimidating.
Mhm.
And so for me, having the ABCs of self-love, where every letter of the alphabet represents a different tenet of self-love, like authenticity or boundaries or forgiveness, I
Yes.
share a little bit about why these things are important. And then there's an active exercise, which I call self-love in action,
Uh-huh.
that gives you a tool set for how to practice these things in your daily life. And
Oh,
it's
how
really
fabulous.
incredible what you uncover along the way.
Yeah. There was something I read in just kind of doing a little research on you, and I really loved it because you said, I thought, and I may get this wrong, so correct me, but I thought this was the year I would get everything I want. I found it was the year I appreciated everything I have.
Yes,
Did you come up with that?
I did.
I love that.
I wrote that poem a few months into the pandemic because that really was how I went into 2020. This was the year of vision. I even went to Oprah's vision tour in February in Los Angeles 2 weeks before the lockdown happened. And I thought, this is the year I'm going to get everything I want.
Right.
And then after a few months, I realized, no, this is the year I appreciate everything I have. And it was so powerful to see how much that quote resonated because it went completely viral over Thanksgiving. And
Yeah.
I loved seeing how people, when they shared the quote, were able to then connect with it and talk about what they learned and what they realized they had. And
Yeah.
I've really done my best to lead with gratitude because in moments of certainty, that's how I get my footing. Gratitude is always how I ground myself.
Mhm.
And that's been a practice that I adopted during the pandemic. And I've been so grateful through my poetry to share with others.
Yeah. Well, in talking about the pandemic, like, we say, oh, yeah, it was very traumatic, right? And it was isolating. But like you, I found a little solace there for a moment because
Mhm.
the world stopped. And I live up in the Sierra Mountains, and there was a neighbor of mine, and we just decided we had to, connect. We need that social. So we decided to go on these walks around the forest. Now I would be on one side and she'd be on
Yeah.
another. We were really crazy, but now I look back and those were beautiful moments because we weren't clouded with such a busy life. We were really appreciating each other. We were appreciating the nature. And I kind of look back and I miss them.
Yeah, I think we all thought things will never be the same. It'll never go back to the way it was. And it's so interesting how quickly things kind of do, in fact, go back to the way they were.
Yeah.
But I don't think I discovered nature until the pandemic. I didn't hear the birds singing. I didn't notice the plants. I didn't feel the wind on my face.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I have committed to is continuing that connection to nature. And in the shift, I write about nature a lot. Like the inspiration behind that book, at least visually, is the monarch butterfly, who right before the pandemic actually almost went extinct. The population went from 100,000 down to 20,000. And they thought, this butterfly, this majestic butterfly, is in really big trouble. And then the next year, the population exploded.
Yeah.
And that is always, at least for me, when I see a monarch butterfly, and there have actually been quite a few around lately, and I always look at them and I remember just how resilient I can be and we all can be, and how much beauty there is in all of us, as long as we're willing to look up from our phones, from our troubles, from the monotony of our routines. The
Yeah.
minute we look up There's so much waiting for us.
Yeah, I read that too in your background, the importance of looking up. And that is just such a simple term, two little words.
Yeah.
But in today's world, we're not looking up. We're
No.
always like this. And I think when you just hear that simple look up, it kind of brings back a simplicity and a reminder to just like take a breather. Like for me, it does, you know,
Yes.
so important. Now, was there something that led you to, like, what led you to this journey of self-love and discovering that? Like, did you just
Yeah.
it just came upon you?
You know, they say necessity breeds innovation. And for me, I found myself in 2015 at a point in my life where I had accomplished everything there was to accomplish, at least for me. I had a great career. I was an attorney and an entrepreneur. I had children. I had these beautiful twin daughters that were 2 years old. I had a dog. I had a house. I had a husband. And the only thing that was missing was myself. And
Mhm.
some along the way on that road to success that we're all so pushed towards to achieve, I had left myself behind. And
Mhm.
so I actually created a ring called the Self-Love Pinky Ring. And I thought, I'm going to wear this ring. I'm going to put it on my pinky. And every time I look at it, I'm going to remember that I need to be a priority in my life, that I need to reconnect with my truest self, and I need to practice self-love and self-care. And
Mhm.
that's where it started, as this simple act of commitment
Mhm.
towards myself. And then from there, when I realized how helpful it was to me, I made the ring available to others through my self-love movement, Fred and Far. And I was able to connect with women around the world who wore the ring and made a pinky promise to love and choose themselves every day.
Mhm.
What was really interesting for me is every woman I would connect with would say, okay, I'm ready. I want to choose myself, but how do I do that? And
Yeah.
that's when I started writing. And
Yeah.
I was always a poet and writer when I was young, but I had sacrificed that path to do something more practical, which is how I became an attorney. And I think it's what so many of us do. We know what our authentic calling is, but we give it up to play it safe. So I
Mhm.
started writing again, and that's how I eventually wrote the book of poetry and became a full-time poet and author.
So, you're not really practicing law anymore. This is your
No.
full time, and then
Yeah.
you're getting ready to do your third book.
Yeah, I'm actually working on some new concepts, and I'm very excited to share that two of my books, Self Love Poetry and The Shift, are now available in exclusive editions at Urban Outfitters. They ordered unique versions for their stores that have more poems.
That's
And
so
next month, Self Love Poetry will be available in Portuguese, which is the first foreign language translation, and it'll be available in Brazil. So
wow.
it's a really exciting time to share not only my words, but also this mission of empowering women to love themselves with
Mhm.
people in new communities and spaces.
Yeah, that is so wonderful. On the pinky ring, I guess that was a symbol, right? Once you put it on, like you switched on, and it reminded me to just bring up, we have our peace pendant. I don't know if
Yes.
I have sent you one of these.
No, not yet, but I would love to wear one because I was so tickled when you reached out, because having that physical reminder,
Yeah.
not only of yourself, but also of the sisterhood that comes with knowing that others around the world are making the same commitment and wearing the same symbol.
Hmm.
That was such a transformative experience for me. I mean,
Right.
I'd be at the airport and I would see someone wearing my ring.
Oh, that's so great.
When I would go up to them, they would always share their story with me of what it meant to them
Yeah.
to have this and commit in this way. And so
Yeah.
I think symbols are incredibly powerful. And I'm just grateful to have had the opportunity to not only create one, but to meet all the people that really are represented by it as well.
Now, those stories that they share with you, do they also share how profound they've changed their lives in ways that they're
Yeah.
more present for their children, or they have, a happier marriage or relationship?
All of the above. I actually collected the stories. Every time someone would buy a ring, I would email them and ask for their story. So those are available on fredandfar.com under sisterhood stories. So
Oh,
you could
great.
read the stories from hundreds of women about what it meant to them to choose themselves. Where were they before? Where are they now?
Hmm.
And the most beautiful thing is it's a unifier. Even though no two stories are the same, The
Right.
passion and love that comes with healing yourself through self-love is really, truly universal. And I think sometimes people get intimidated and they think that suggesting a woman loves herself means she's selfish or she doesn't need anyone. But actually, I have found that self-love is the foundation of all love.
Yeah.
And when we nurture ourselves, then we're able to connect authentically with others. And the love that we engage in is much deeper
Mhm.
and more long lasting. And so it's made me a better mother, a better friend. And also, it means I have more integrity because I'm showing up from a place of wholeness.
Right. And you said, some women may, or men, whatever, may think it's intimidating. But I also think, and I think we should expand upon this, some people might be watching this going, self love. How do I self love myself?
Yeah.
I mean, what do I do? Do I physically give myself a hug, or am I telling myself positive affirmations? Like, I don't even think they know what the first step to get there.
And that's a really good point. And it's something I talk about a lot. I think the first step is getting to know yourself.
Hmm.
Self love starts with authenticity. Who are you? What are your needs? What are your passions? What are all the parts of yourself that you've tucked away over the years? The parts that you thought were unlovable or undesirable that you hid behind a veil of shame? How
Hmm.
do you bring forward all the aspects of who you are and create integration within yourself and be like, you know what? This is who I am. And then from there, how do you practice self-care to honor that person? How do you set boundaries? How do you move your body? How do you choose your thoughts? There are all these different tools that are available. And I really write about this a lot in the ABCs of self-love. Once you discover who you are, the way you honor that person is by dedicating yourself to acts of self-care that make you feel whole and worthy and seen, not by the world, but by yourself.
Hmm.
Then from there, you create alignment where you build a world around you that aligns with your authentic self. So
Hmm.
you revisit those relationships in your life. Are they still serving you? Are they based on a person that you constructed to survive? How can you then reacclimate and recalibrate those relationships to honor who you are today? Maybe your career isn't the right fit for you. How can you make adjustments in your role so that you're not constantly in opposition to your truest self?
Hmm.
It's a very complex thing, but if I had to drill it down to one sentence, I would say self-love is a daily commitment to knowing and honoring your authentic self.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's where you begin.
And making time for yourself too. I think, like, whether it is a nature walk or sitting by yourself, reflecting or meditating and not getting caught up so much in the busy world, right? And then on relationships, I think as we get older, we evolve. And like you said, some may not be serving us as they did 5 years ago. And I think even for me, I've had to say, yeah, I'm not really getting much out of that, and time is precious. I'm gonna have to kinda let that go.
Well,
And
Mary Oliver, who's a poet and she's profound, said once, "What will you do with this one precious life?" And I think that's a reminder we could all use.
mhm,
What are we going to do? It's one precious life.
right.
And I think having the courage to set boundaries, having the courage to show up as your true self. And also, I can't stress this enough, having the courage to dream,
Mhm,
have
mhm.
desire, to be fueled by a need for by your desires instead of a quest for productivity or achievement.
Yes.
And these are all things that our culture hasn't really prioritized for a
No.
long time. But I think nature, pleasure, desire, honesty, authenticity, this realm of being whole instead of broken, these are all things within our grasp. And it starts with ourselves. And the beauty of that is you don't need a therapist, you don't need a lot of money, you don't need anyone in your life to agree to participate.
Mhm,
There are these little tweaks you can make all on your own every day to connect with yourself and make space for yourself. And over time, what ends up happening is your life, your future starts to shift and it
mm.
starts to feel good.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we all want, is to live in a state of joy.
Right.
And I believe that self-love is a pathway to joy.
And I think being very conscious of this, like, when you get up in the morning, to be conscious and think about this and yourself and how you're going to give yourself that self-love today, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes, or taking time, or going
Yeah.
for a walk, or journaling, or whatever it is. And Melody, you also talked about a 50% communication tip. Was that something I read?
Oh, yes. I was giving a talk on LinkedIn. And as a writer, half of writing is editing. And one of the things I've discovered, and this is a tip that I give everyone that they can use either in their personal communications or in their work life, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to write, start it at 100% and then try to edit out 50%.
Mm,
That's how you get to the heart of what you're trying to say. And
right.
so that's a tip that everyone can use. And it's certainly something I use as a poet. I don't try to edit while I'm writing. I
Hmm.
create and I let my creativity flow. And once that's done, then I put on my editor hat
Yeah.
and then I say more by saying less.
Yeah, that's really great. I think it's like standing back and taking a look at everything that's like there in the kitchen sink, and then going, okay, wait a minute, how does this kind of flesh out? That's a very
Yeah.
good tip. Yeah.
And, one thing that I think is so important to say is I'm someone who is proof that it's never too late to change course. It's never too late to become who you may have been. It's
Yeah.
never too late to live your dreams. I wrote poetry when I was a child. I even published a poem in an anthology when I was 10 years old. And I didn't publish my next poem until I was like 38. And
Right.
this has always been the truest expression of who I am. And even though I tabled it for a long time, it didn't degrade. And I think we all have those passions and things we wish we had tried or we want to get back to. And I hope listeners will give themselves permission to dream a little bit and revisit what they think they left behind forever, because it's never too late.
Well, listen to your intuition, right? If there's something that's always kind of there, like you had that. But I think, yeah, we get so inclined to be on this productivity wagon, and that, you're an attorney, to leave that, and that probably pretty scary, right?
But,
Secure job, lots of money, you've got a family,
yeah.
and all of that. But you were listening to that kind of inner voice of where your heart and your passion was.
Yeah, and I think our bodies are talking to us all the time. We're just so distracted, we're not paying attention. And for me, when I was an attorney, I had crippling anxiety and hallucinations. And that was my body screaming at me and saying, this is not why you were put on this planet.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that other people weren't born to be attorneys, because I would see my colleagues who were just energized by the work they were doing.
Yeah.
But for me, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And I think adopting a self-love practice is a wonderful way to make space for that inner voice, that knowing, your intuition, the part of you that's connected to everything and everyone. And it clears out some of that noise and that distraction. And it knows where
Hmm.
much of our life is spent thinking. There is a part of us that just knows. And
Right.
self-love has been how I've really amplified that voice.
Now, has your family noticed it? Like, as you evolve through this process, your daughters and your family and people around you, have the relationships kind of gotten better and changed and deeper?
One of the best things that has happened for me is that I no longer am in fight or flight all the time and in need for desperate control. I'm no longer a perfectionist. I'm no longer so consumed with the how. How is it going to work out?
Yeah.
What's going to happen? How am
Yeah.
I going to be safe?
I can totally relate to that.
And so as a result, I think my husband, my children, my family, everyone gets a softer, more trusting, and more joyful version of me. And
Yeah.
the truth is, my life hasn't actually changed. I still live in the same house I lived in when I was at my peak anxiety. My family hasn't changed. Our finances have gone up and down, and there have been moments that have been tighter, but ultimately, it's how I carry my life that has changed, and
Mhm.
to carry it with trust and joy and ease is such a gift, not only to me, but to everyone around me as well.
Kind of like going a little bit more with just go with the flow, right? Like we don't like you. I always want to know what the outcome is. I'm always trying to figure out, well, if I do this, how are they going to respond, especially from a business perspective. But as I'm getting older too, I'm trying to like, hey, just go with the flow. You don't always have to figure it out. You don't always have to have all the answers. Like just let it evolve.
One of my really simple poems says, I worried myself into the darkness. I loved myself into the light.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
it's
that's
just that
great.
idea of we all deserve lightness. We all deserve ease. And although I've been worried many times in my life, nothing I ever worried about happened. Other things happened. Other things that I didn't even know to anticipate went completely wrong.
Yes.
But you know, Brene Brown says that worrying is just dress rehearsing tragedy. And
Hmm.
that really stuck with me. It's like, why am I dress rehearsing tragedy when I could be dress rehearsing joy? You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. And also, we're learning that you don't want to have that tragedy on your mind. You want to have the joy because you manifest.
mm-hmm.
And so you don't want to be living in that space of negativity or tragedy, and you want to be living in a different, healthier, joyful space to have that kind of life that projects that way.
Absolutely. And I think every future is available to us.
Mm.
And for me, I've really shifted to daydreaming about a beautiful future instead of fearfully planning and trying to protect myself from the end of days.
Right.
Because for me, the pandemic was the end of days and we got through it.
Yeah.
And if I can get through that, I can get through anything.
And we got through it, and we had some really nice moments, like
Yeah.
the world was quieter, the dolphins came back, the
Yeah.
butterflies came back, we got to have deeper relationships. So I really I appreciate that time now and reflect on it too.
And one of the things I'm always careful to note is I think it's really easy to write off positivity as toxic positivity. Oh, you're just saying like, be happy and don't worry. And that is not at all what I'm saying. So much of my work is devoted to honoring the full spectrum of feelings and experiences that we have. And I think that it's just as important to feel your sadness as it is to feel your joy.
Hmm.
What self-love has allowed me to do is to feel my sadness without apologizing for it, without feeling shame about it, and
Yeah.
also without unnecessarily holding on to it. As things come, I feel them, I process them, I do what I need to do, I say what I need to say, and from there, I'm able to move on. Whereas the old version of me would just bury everything inside my body,
Yeah.
develop chronic illnesses, and then I woke up one day and wondered, like, why? And it's because I wasn't present enough or brave enough or knowing enough to deal with the full spectrum as it happened. And I think we're seeing, an endemic of that where people are really struggling because they haven't been afforded the space or the tools to process what's happening to them in real time.
Right. And what a great place to be now, right? Like you don't have to carry all this burden and weight, and you know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I hope today that, you've enlightened some of our viewers to say, yeah, there's a different way, there's different habits. I can make some changes here. So before we wrap up, tell us where we can find your books.
So my books are available wherever books are sold. So your favorite local bookstore, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you shop, you'll be able to find them. Just search for Melody Godfred, which is also where you can connect with me on social media or the web. So my website is melodygodfred.com. Those are my social handles. And most recently, I launched a Substack newsletter that's free called Self Love Confidential. And every week I share not only my poetry as an oracle for the week ahead, but also confession where I dive deep into some complex feeling or experience I'm having and talking about how self-love is what guided me through it.
Oh, that's great. And I'll just say for our viewers too, on ArmyPink, look for ArmyPink, click and subscribe, go to our YouTube channel. And Melody, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I love the message you brought. It's been a little different than what we've had, and it's so needed.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I loved our time together.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day. Bye,
Too.
everyone.